Thank you very much. I noticed that there wasn't a land acknowledgement before the meeting. And so I feel I'm in the right place. And I'm having along with the PPC, and I only recently, as recently as yesterday, met the leader, Maxime Bernier, and I thought he was absolutely terrific yesterday, both in Chilliwack and in Langley, and we're very lucky to have him here with us. So I was asked by Karen, I've known for a few years, and she said to do Indigenous. And I thought that really what I should be given, not to take away from anybody else, as a longtime teacher, I should have been given something to do maybe with education or with the woke stuff, because that certainly is something that is eroding public confidence and education and hurting a lot of kids. But I'll leave that to people who probably are going to do a better job with it anyway. But I'm happy to do the Indigenous because it explains why I'm no longer teaching. I haven't for 4 years, because I said that the kids died from disease, those who did so tragically in residential schools long ago. Many places today, I'd still feel uncomfortable saying that. I find it really fascinating. This is the one comment, I don't know if Mr. Bernier remembers, but I wanted to say just one thing to him yesterday, and that was that my big frustration is how many people in our country now, particularly leaders of our institutions, duck from issues. So it's not just a question of saying the right thing or the wrong thing. It's not even being able to talk about things. And I think that's particularly tragic in the school system, because kids, we're developing them, preparing them for the challenges that meet ahead. My colleague here, Chris, talked about something very serious, how hard it is for the younger generation to get into the housing market. So the idea of closing discussion as opposed to opening it is highly anti-educational. I read and I won't go through as thoroughly as Chris, but I was absolutely delighted when I looked at the PPC platform for Indigenous people, because it was everything that I imagined. And I should say to you that I went to graduate school, and my thesis supervisor for my master's degree was the Prime Minister, Mark Carney's father, Robert. And so that was, this dates me, of course, because that was in the mid-'80s. And we talked about residential schools as part of the program. He was the chair of the department called Educational Foundations. I'm kind enough to create a nice relationship with me and get me through the program. And he said I was the quickest ever through the program. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I just want to get rid of me. But he was an incredible man. And we talked about educational policy. At the time, it was called Indian Educational Policy. And there was never any condemnation of residential schools. That wasn't the point. The point is what can we do for the groups in our society who are least successful? And there's some groups that come to Canada and do very well. And I know I'm in a room where I can speak without curtailing my speech in an unnecessary way. I remember my uncle, who was a doctor, saying that they have to be very careful to have quota programs at the University of Toronto Medical School, because otherwise it would be all Chinese and Jews that would be would be doctors, because they were the ones that performed the most. And I'm noticing that's still true in schools today as a teacher, seeing that there's some groups that do very well, the Chinese, Koreans, and in particular, but all sorts of groups. And then, of course, there are groups that don't do as well. Now, there's two approaches that one can take. One can decide to be what they call DEI or something, and say what we need to do is level our society. That's the great Canadian tendency. Then bring down the more successful groups and raise up the less successful groups. Well, whether Robert Carney was really a DEI guy or not, I don't think he was. I think his heart was in the right place. He wanted to figure out how to help the one group in Canada that was struggling the most, and not just adjusting to Canadian society, but just managing to stay in school. So there were lots of things that were tried, as people know, last century, to educate in a successful way Indigenous people. And none of them really seemed to work well, whether it was residential schools or day schools or integration and all sorts of programs. And so what he did was he spent time with his students like me to try and figure out what would work. And that's sort of the excitement that I carried into the teaching profession. I was a principal for a time and a college instructor, and I've done various things, and also presented in different schools across Europe because I was there, Switzerland for 6 years, and it was always that idea, what can we do to make things better for all groups? But let's start as Canadians with Indigenous people, since they are ostensibly the group that's the least successful. It wasn't ever a case of going, why don't we call this group of Canadians, a horrible name in that Manichaean sense of they're the baddies, and these other group here are the goodies, and we can only say positive things about them, negative things about the others. It just doesn't make for adult conversation. So the point I would want to make above all, and I haven't got the hook yet from Karen, but I sense that's coming. She's kicking me occasionally. And that is that, first of all, I think it's absolutely absurd. And I feel at home with the PPC in saying this, that we're a country that's based on, obviously, rules and rules-based society. We have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And I think that's good news. I won't repeat it because it's rude. But no, she's wonderful. But say to you, with a society like ours, we have this tendency, and I certainly see it with the Conservatives and the Liberals, to put everybody into groups. And the school system is absolutely horrible because you're putting the kids into race buckets and into gender, of course, categorizations, and you're getting rid of literature, and you're doing all sorts of things right now. And it's all because of this group or that group. And you know that. You wouldn't be here if you weren't obviously conscious of how identity politics works and how it's captured the school system. But I'm resistant to all that, and I believe in individuals. I was told one of the allegations against me was that what if there were Indigenous kids in the classroom when I was saying that there is no evidence of murder in residential schools. And this idea of, again, I think there's nothing worse than looking at an individual in the classroom, a kid, and thinking that kid is not what's inside him or her, but all these birth certificate characteristics and things that the child can't do anything about. And so I'm very strongly an advocate of individual rights. And I care about if there's a whole group of people in rural Canada or northern Canada or Indigenous people in more isolated areas. I care about them, and I like to see them to be successful. And the model that we have in place right now isn't working. So if you get a chance to look at the PPC platform, it's absolutely revolutionary. And the sense is, first of all, is looking at them as individuals. It's recognizing that welfare is not going to help individuals or communities, and that they should assume the same rights and responsibilities as other Canadians. And so that's again, that's the most important thing here. So I know I got 2 more minutes up. And I'm going to use it because I'm a teacher, being on work for a few years, so I don't get this opportunity very, very often. But I think it's an important thing to say, and I'd like to end on a bit of a different note, and that comes back to residential schools. It's one of the issues that nobody wants to talk about in this election, and I'm going to make sure that I talk about it quite a bit. And that is, we've evolved in the last 4 years to the point where we can now say, well, residential schools, yes, they were bad, but that didn't mean that there was genocide, or that doesn't mean that Christian missionaries were murderers, or that doesn't mean that early Canada was this terrible racist state. That's not good enough for me. So I'm somebody who seeks out what the truth is. It guides me. Residential schools weren't bad at all. And I don't know how you can make a judgment about any school system and say everything's bad and over there everything's good. That's absolutely absurd. If you get to know the men and the women that worked in those schools, including, again, my thesis super Robert Carney, you would learn that there were many, many wonderful men and women who devoted themselves fully to help those kids. And so I think we need to move away from these ridiculous blanket statements and put our minds together and create a Canada that serves all individuals and gives everybody responsibilities equally. Thank you.